Today, we're going to talk about this little franchise, Insidious, going all the way to the latest chapter, The Red Door. Now, I have this in chronological order, starting with Chapter 3, going into the last key, then going into Insidious 1, and in Insidious 2, and then finally The Red Door, because that is the chronological order of all of these things. We have this, which started everything, which began a certain new era of horror films, and it certainly was one of my milestone horror films. There were like 2-3 eras of horror for me. My first era of horror that I started watching horror films was the era of American remakes of Japanese horror films, such as like The Grudge, The Ring, Pulse, One Missed Call, those types of remakes, American remakes, starring American characters and all these stuff, of Japanese horror stories. Now, I ended up hunting down the original Japanese versions of a lot of these things. Ringu, Ju-on, Pulse, honestly, was called Pulse in both versions. And obviously, the Japanese version, to me, was the superior take, but I still ended up enjoying The Ring. I still ended up enjoying The Grudge and The Grudge 2. The Grudge 3 kind of stretched things just a little too much to my taste. But after that, we have this Insidious. It comes out when the era of American remakes of Japanese horror films was kind of getting stale. So we have this, which feels like both a throwback and a new thing at the same time. Insidious is basically Poltergeist. The Spielbergian Poltergeist. Is it Spielberg? Yes, here we have Poltergeist, and it says it right here, a Steven Spielberg production, but he did not direct it. It was directed by Tobe Hooper. Honestly, Poltergeist is an excellent film, and I can actually just put all these away for a moment just to talk about all of the comparisons between Insidious and Poltergeist. And there are quite a lot of comparisons that I can make. Let me see if I can find let me see in the back here. On the back of one of these. Yes! Here we go. On the back here, we have this little shot here of the characters of Tucker, Specs, and Elise. Now, these three are almost ripped entirely verbatim from Poltergeist, the Lambert family that is featured in Insidious 1 and Insidious 2, and in Insidious The Red Door, are also, in a way, ripped from Poltergeist. They're ripped from other types of horror films as well, but the biggest tropes that I saw this film taking notes from was Poltergeist. We have a haunted house story about a child who is very much connected with the hauntingness, which is the same thing here. We have Dalton here. We have the Carol Ann here. We have the character getting pulled into the spirit realm with Dalton here and Carol Ann here. We have the family experiencing all sorts of crazy stuff going on, just like in here and in here, while they're trying to figure out what's wrong with where the child is in this one, and what's wrong with this one, and why the kid won't wake up. And then they end up calling ghost investigators. So in here we have the two ghost investigators. They call these guys in, and they call Elise in as well. But these guys call her in. But first we have these two here. Tucker and Specs. Tucker and Specs are based off... Are they in the back of this one? They are not. Damn. Let me try to remember their names. I had to use my handy-dandy little phone here to look up the names of these characters, because I have honestly forgotten their names. We have parapsychologist Martha Lesh and her teammates Ryan and Marty, which are basically what these three characters are based off of. But Elise is also based off as another character that shows up later in the film, the character that that Martha Lesh and Ryan and Marty end up calling on for extra aid, and that person is played by, I forget her name, but her character is named Tangina, Tangina was the psychic lady, and Elise is basically a merging of Martha, Lesh, and Tangina into one character to maybe jazz it up a little bit. But Tucker and Specs are definitely based off of Marty and, what was his name again? Ryan and Marty. And then Ryan and Marty do a lot of comedic things in Poltergeist, not necessarily to the level of comedy that you end up seeing in The Last Key and Insidious 3. Their comedic antics in these two films honestly make these two films look like serious dramas, but they end up being comedic enough to mirror the characters in this film. And in this one we have the stake scene where the characters goes up, they like raid the fridge in the middle of the night while they're they're supposed to be looking for the poltergeist and activities of the poltergeist. They end up raiding the family's fridge to eat food and stuff like that, which is a lot like what Tucker ends up doing. He comes in, he's eating snacks and all this stuff. He's very rude to people. The people hold out their hands to shake him, and Tucker just looks at the hand and then just walks away. Specs is the nerd who ends up talking and explaining all of the things, a lot like one of the other character who ends up talking and explaining all of the things in here. And of course, Elise is a parapsychologist, much like Martha Lesh is a parapsychologist. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of tropes. These three characters are ripped from the Lambert family, is ripped here. Dalton is ripped from, is a comparison to Carol Ann. And both characters end up being lost in the spirit realm, and they have to have a family member, a parent. In this one, it is the mother, I believe, and in this one, it's the father, Josh Lambert. And both end up going into the spirit realm to rescue their child, and they come back, and all the spooky stuff comes in. They want to take the child, all this stuff's going on. And then you go outside in Poltergeist, and you find that they built the new house settlement on top of a burial ground, and they did not remove the bodies. They just removed the headstones and then built homes over it. They didn't take care of the bodies. So when a sinkhole happens and it's raining, and you go in, and all the bodies start popping up out of the water, it's really good. Poltergeist is an amazing film. I could watch it tons of times and will never get bored. This is the original Warner's copy. Only Warner's, to my knowledge, made DVD cases like this. This is like their original run of DVD cases. They had this little clicking little door, you can open it up, and then the little thing slid open. Now we just get more DVDs like this. We just get them like that. But honestly, Insidious taking a lot of notes from Poltergeist is a good thing, because Poltergeist is a very good film, which ended up making Insidious a very good film story by result. But it's not an original story. It is obviously copying from films that have been very successful in their time back in the day. It's very refreshing, though, because of the direction from Mr. James Wan here. James Wan's directing style helps to elevate him apart from making this film look exactly like this. Though you do see a lot of the comparisons. We have Josh Lambert, who plays a lot of comparisons to the father in Poltergeist. The father is a little bit not as believing of all the spoopy stuff, so he spends time away from the house. I believe he ends up having his own place. He's distancing himself. He's drinking a lot. It's a very, very, very raw, family-centered, scary story, which is both of these films. Where Insidious steps apart from Poltergeist, I would say, is in the directing, like I mentioned a moment ago. There are scare scenes in this where they draw and they linger on shots. The things quiet down a little bit. It brings in the jump scare that everybody gets sick and tired of these days. But in this, it was a little bit fresher. And then we had plenty of that during the Japanese remake era. But they really draw it up to 11 here. But in a good way, I would argue. Because in the typical fake-out jump scares where where we have a character lingering on a shot, he's looking at something that might creepy. And then somebody walks up behind him and grabs on the shoulder, and then the sound just goes dun, and then the character gets shocked and turns around and hits the other guy who snuck up on them. And I hate those types of fake out jump scares. I hate those types of fake out jump scares. In this one, the long drawn out shots feel like they're building up to something that is actually there. We have all of the sound draining from the picture. We have a character looking at something, but the shot is like half his face is over here, the other half the camera's over here looking at something behind the character, and we see something in the distance. We see something in the shadows. We see something that it's a little bit hard to see, but we know that something's there. But the sound is all drawn, it's all quiet. There's no jolt yet, but we know that something's going to happen. We see the thing there. The character turns around and boom! And then they're gone, and sometimes you get the feeling that these guys are just trolls. They just like to troll you. But the jump scares do pay off, and there are quite a few of them in this one, but they do feel like they work, especially in the James Wan jump scare department. In Chapter 3, I don't think there's as many total, but I like them, but I don't think that the ones that this film has pays off in the way that these two had them. Insidious The Last Key had a shot in here that I think is one of the best scares in the entire franchise to me. There's a shot in the beginning of the film where Elise is in her old bedroom, and she's looking at something over on the other side, and behind her, you, the viewer, can see a suit that just seems to be floating in the air. It just seems to be floating right behind her, getting closer. It doesn't look like a ghost. It doesn't look like any creepy, crawly demon. No, it's just a suit thing that's silently coming up behind her. And then she turns around, there's no dung, there's no super scoopy. I thought that was excellently done. I like those types of build-up things to actual scary, spooky, paranormal stuff. I hate the fake-outs. And that's one thing that I can say that at least the first 4 Insidious films do, is that they don't have as many fake-outs, but there is one very bad one in Chapter 3. In Chapter 3, one of the worst fake-outs that I can... not really a fake-out, but one of the worst jump scares that really causes you to suspend your disbelief is we have our character here. She is on a seedy side of town. She just got turned down from an acting audition, a stage play audition. She's talking to her friend, and then she looks over into the distance and she sees a creepy guy just standing there on the street in the middle of the road. She walks over into the street to get a good look at him, and then from behind it, boom, there comes a car. You would hear that car long before it hit you, I would argue, because, it's a straight road. The people would obviously see it as well, and they go like, hey, look behind you, there's a car coming. Then, of course, when the character walks out into the middle of the road, the car is coming 90 miles an hour. Boom! You go jumping into the air, fall flat on the air, breaks your legs. And her legs, she'll recover, but she's going to have to be in a wheelchair for quite some time. But after that accident, she is half in the spirit world, the further, and half in the regular world, and then the spookiness starts to start. This film, in comparison to The Last Key, is not Elise's story. It has Elise's story in it, but this one is Elise's story, if that makes sense. This one is this girl's story. We focus on her. We focus on her family. We focus on a lot of that stuff. We do swap places, settings, to see how Elise is doing from time to time. We see that she is retired from her parapsychologist stuff after something in the past that we ended up learning was an event in Insidious 2 where she found Josh as a kid and saved him from the woman in black. And then the woman in black blamed her for all of the stuffy stuff's going on. And so every time she would go to get close to the supernatural further realm, the lady in black would be there to get after her, and she got too scared of the lady in black, so she stopped doing that until she eventually convinces Elise that she has to get over her fear of the woman in black, and that she's stronger than the woman in black because she's alive. And so she goes in there and she takes care of those guys, and blah 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 blah, everybody's happy at the end. But we introduce Tucker and Specs. We introduce a lot of elements in this film that would carry over into The Last Key in a way that I really like. Because my favorite characters in these first 4 films, are not the Lambert family. My favorite characters are not the Lambert family. I do like Josh. I think he's a very good character. I do like, I forget her name. I think her name is Renee, I think. I do like her, but my favorite characters ended up being Elise, Tucker, and Specs. People don't like Tucker and Specs. They think, oh, they're too comical. They think they're walking into a film that's supposed to be this serious horror drama. Have you seen the Poltergeist? It's comical. It's very comical. The Tucker and Specs pulls away from this. Marty and Ryan, the pulls away. They're the characters that they were inspired from, more than likely, were pretty comical. They were playing around and things. The Lambert family are based off of the family in this, and in this they were doing a lot of comical things. Like, for example, they pull the chair out to a certain spot, and the chair slides into the wall, and they're playing a game with the Poltergeist. The woman goes to grab the chair, and she puts it back, and the chair slides into the wall again. And then she puts the baby there. The baby slides into the wall. And then she tries to get the father to notice, and then the ghost suddenly stops doing it. It's a comical moment there, and it does alleviate the horror elements to a degree with these characters. And that is the aura, the vibe that I got with these Insidious films. They are not supposed to be super serial. They're not supposed to be super serious films. No, they're not supposed to be that. They are family-oriented, family-focused, like most of these horror films tend to be. They're very family-focused, and they have a supernatural horror, serious drama element to it. But they also have comedy to come in to alleviate it. Even the latest film, The Red Door, has moments that alleviate the tension. They have a character in this film that is basically just comic relief, the way she's so nonchalant. She feels like she comes from a completely different movie. She is the stand-in for Tucker and Specs because they're not really in this film to a larger degree as they were in the previous 4 films. So we had to have a character that made you giggle a little bit. They had to have a character that made you laugh a little bit, and to go to basically pull you out of the horror for a little while. So they had her in here. I really liked that girl's character. I forget her name. I don't know her name, but I liked the girl's character in this film. She was very welcome indeed, though I did miss Tucker and Specs in this film quite a degree. But this film was supposed to focus on the Lambert family. It's not supposed to focus on Elise. It's not supposed to focus on Tucker and Specs. It's supposed to focus on Josh and Dalton and the aftermath of Insidious 2. So let's get down to the story. Let's move these films out of the way. Let's try to focus just on this for the moment. We're going to go in chronological order, starting with Insidious 3 that I've already talked to a degree about. We have this family. We have the daughter. She has a little brother, and we have the father whose wife has just recently died, and he is struggling to connect with his kids. He doesn't know how to be a mom to the kids. He just knows how to go off to earn the money to buy everything, but he doesn't know how to take care of his family, so he leaves all of that pressure onto the daughter, who is also mourning for her mother. So it's a little bit unfair to her. She's struggling, he's struggling. It's a very, very heart-wrenching tale there. And she ends up trying to look for her mom in the other side of the spirit realm, the further. She ends up doing a seance with Elise because she starts to feel like her mom might be calling to her, but it's not her mom. It is something else entirely that has been stalking her. It is the spirit of an elderly gentleman who died on the floor above her apartment. Then we cut to Elise. Elise has been going through her own trauma, her own family trauma. She had a husband, and they were very, very close. They were probably partners in the whole parapsychologist thing that she used to do. But then he died through alleged suicide, and she has been hurting ever since. And she quit her psychologicalness because of the woman in black, as I said before. So she's just living her life with her aging dog, just living a quiet, timid life. And you could tell by her figure, with her figure, she's a small lady. And she feels small at the start of this film. She feels small, she feels small, and she doesn't feel as strong as her character ends up being in, say, Insidious: The Last Key, Insidious 2, Insidious 1. She doesn't have that confidence that she had in those films. So we have the daughter going to see Elise. They have a talk. Elise tries to do a little seance to contact the mother, but then it ends up failing. They end up contacting a very supernatural, creepy, spooky demon instead. So she gets scared and says, "Don't try to contact your mother anymore." And she says the trademark line, "When you look into the world of the dead and you call out, everybody can hear you." So that's pretty ominous, is spooky in and of itself. So she goes home, and spooky stuff starts to happen. She breaks her legs, the car breaks her legs. That's a pretty disbelieving moment right there, but I'm gonna let it go. She breaks her legs, and then the spooky guy comes in, the guy who can't breathe. He comes to try to take her soul into the further to keep as a pet. You see, this guy is not like the spirits that we encounter in the first two Insidiouses. Normally, you would have spirits who inhabit the further, and they're people who want to live again. They want to possess living bodies to have a chance at life again, because they're dead, and they don't like being dead, basically. This guy, he's dead, and he wants the living to be dead too. That's basically it. He's trying to kill this gal. He's trying to break her spirit. He's trying to break her bones. He's breaking her bones one by one. He almost broke her neck. She's wearing a neck brace halfway through the film. Her arms are getting messed up. Her whole body is getting messed up. And the weaker she gets in the real world, the more her spirit body manifests in the spirit world, and the stronger of a hold the man who can't breathe has on her. The father ends up believing in the spirit stuff after the daughter convinces him of all the stuff that's mysteriously happening to her can't be explained rationally, so you must think irrationally to get to the direction you're needing to go. So he ends up contacting people, finding Tucker and Specs. Tucker and Specs are not working with Elise as of Chapter 3. They are on their own, and they go in to investigate the place, and then the father eventually learns that they're basically frauds. They're basically Zach Baggins. That's another one. That's another one that I want to kind of compare to. And I think, I'm not a big Ghost Adventures watcher or connoisseur, but I know a little bit about Zach Baggins and all of that stuff, right? I know a little bit about those controversies about the fraudulent natures and faking hauntings and paying off people to give testimony about hauntings and all that stuff. I know about those allegations. I know about all that stuff, and that, I feel, was also mirrored in this. Their characters, they are based off the ghost hunters from Poltergeist, and they're also based off real-life ghost hunters. They're basically building up something that isn't there to get clicks, to get watches, to get views. And they end up saying that they're frauds. And the father gets a little bit mad. And then Elise shows up out of nowhere because she ends up realizing that she's getting contacts from the spooky realm as well, realizing that if she doesn't help this girl, she is going to die. So she comes to do the right thing. She comes here to help out, and she says that, "I think I can use you too." And she ends up making them her sidekick specs in this film, and together with the father, they are able to rescue the daughter from the man who can't breathe. Elise ends up getting closure from her husband's death, and she's able to say goodbye to him in the further, and she beats the man who can't breathe, and she ends up reuniting with her mom, and with that newfound power and belief in herself, she's able to recorporeate herself and get strengthened the further, and breaks the man who can't breathe's mask. And then the man who can't breathe goes into dust mode, because even in the further, you can die, apparently. So he gets dissipated, and they all live happily ever after. The most important takeaway from Chapter 3 is how Elise meets Tucker and Specs, and that leads into the last key. The last key is wholly about Elise. It is wholly Elise's story. We open with Elise as a child in her childhood home, and I think the 50s or the 60s. It's way back when. And she's got a brother. I don't know if it's a little brother or an older brother. I think it's a little brother. And the little brother's name is Christian. And they have parents. The mother is loving and kind, and the father is a drunk, and he's very angry and mean. And the father hates ghosts. He hates the fact that his daughter can speak to ghosts, and he's trying to beat out Elise's gift from her so that she can deny her gift and stop getting close to the spirit realm and all of that stuff. We don't know why he does this. We think it's just because he's a monster. He's a drunk, he's a meanie-faced bad guy who beats his wife and beats his kids, blah, 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 blah. So, one day, Elise gets locked in the basement after seeing a ghost of a woman. So, he locks her down there, and she ends up encountering the Red Door. The theme in this franchise. Red doors are all over the place. We don't exactly know what they are. We think, thanks to Insidious 1 and 2, that these red doors might just be the domain of the red-faced Darth Maul demon. But it's a little bit more convoluted in these Elise spin-offs, because we see a couple of these doors and they just open to domains of powerful dark spirits, not just the Darth Maul demon. We open this up and we see the domain of the prison warden spirit, as I'm going to call him, or Key Face, even though it's Key Hands. We're going to call him Key Hands. Yeah, we're going to call him Key Hands. Edward Key Hands, I don't know. So he has keys for hands, but there's a voice coming out of the keyhole in this red door speaking to a child, Elise, saying that I don't know, she's convincing her to open the door, right? So Elise finds a key, she opens the door, and out comes a creepy key hand with 4 keys for her hands. They pick up the key that's on the floor that Elise drops and puts it on their hand, so it's like a missing finger or something. So now we learn that was the last key. We don't know what these keys mean, though, so this is pretty interesting stuff, right? This entire franchise has been written by Leigh Whannell, who plays Specs in these films. He co-wrote the first Insidious, and he co-wrote the second Insidious alongside James Wan. He is credited as having also come up with this series alongside James Wan. So when James Wan departed this project, I think he does have a producer credit with the third one. I don't know about this one. But Oren Peli is still here. Oren Peli comes back for this one. Leigh Whannell comes back to write this one. So we get a lot of the same consistency and tone. But we don't really have a consistency in plot sometimes. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in some of these sequels. But here we have Key Hands at the last key. He gets his keys, he comes out, and he has a really cool supernatural spiritual ability. He has a key on his index finger that he uses to basically mute you so that you cannot scream. That is pretty frightening, actually. You're stuck there in the basement, and you're screaming at the top of your lungs, and no sound is coming out. It's a lot like you not having a mouth and you have to scream. Well, you do have a mouth and you are screaming, but you can't make a sound! So nobody can hear you scream. Nobody can hear you struggle and try to get away from this thing, so they can't come to help you. They might be in the next room, right next door, and a pin could drop and they'd hear you, but you're silent and you can't scream, and something could happen to you and they'd not hear you. That is very, very, very unnerving. It's a pretty cool ability. I really liked that about the Last Key. The second ability is he could basically unlock your spirit and take it into the further, which is what he does to a degree. To Elise, not to Elise, but to one of the daughters. Yeah, that's it. To one of the daughters. He doesn't do it to Elise in this flashback, but he does it to one of Christian's daughters. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a pretty convoluted story with a lot of stuff. People consider The Last Key the weakest of the films. I don't consider it the weakest. I consider it the second weakest, behind a certain somebody. But I could try to keep it chronological, note by note. So Elise gets possessy. The mother comes down and saves the daughter, but the key-face demon, the key hands demon, ends up killing the mother. The father comes down. He gets pretty mad at the daughter. He's mourning for his wife. And then the kids end up growing up into teenagers, and teenage Elise ends up encountering another ghost and tries to convince her father that she had just seen a ghost. The father goes in, he says there's no ghost. They have a fight. Elise runs away, leaving her younger brother Christian to the mercy, or lack thereof, of their father. So she runs away, and there's all sorts of spooky stuff happening. We go now to adult Elise, or adulty, or adult, golden years Elise. Golden years Elise, with she's now working alongside Tucker and Specs, and they get a new gig. They get a new call on the phone by a man named Garza, who happens to be living in Elise's childhood home. Elise at first declines the gig, but then after thinking about it a little time, she has to face her past, so she decides to go investigate the gig and goes to Garza's house. And she ends up encountering another ghost spirit, the ghost spirit that she encountered as a teenager. She ends up talking about this to Tucker and Specs, and then they go out to the housey house, out into the small town. They go out into the small town, and they meet up with two girls, and Elise says, "Oh, you guys, I recognize you. You look like people I know." And then walks in an old man played by, I had to look up his first name, and his last name was Davison. They end up meeting Christian, who was played by Bruce Davison. And Bruce Davison is pretty up there in the years. He doesn't exactly look like a father of teenage daughters, so I end up looking at the actual age of the daughters' characters, the actors. And so if Bruce Davison is 77 years old now, or was it 78? 77 or 78? What was it? He is 77. So if Bruce Davison is 77 now in 2023, then 5 years ago, or 6 years ago in was it 6 years? 5 years. 5 years. It was 5 years. 2018, it was 5 years ago. So in 2018, he would have to be 72 years old. Now, Elise is around that age, too. Elise's actress is around that age, too. So I don't think that Bruce Davison's character, Christian, had kids in his mid-50s. Early 50s. I think he probably have it in his 30s. Right? He could have had it in his mid-30s, right? I recognized one of the actresses in this film. She is Spencer Locke. She plays the younger daughter, despite, I believe, being older? No, she is actually younger. Spencer Locke currently is 32 years old, so 5 years ago she'd be about 27. The girl who plays Imogen is played by Caitlin Gerard, and Caitlin is currently 35 years old. So 5 years ago she would be 30 years old. So these are clearly not teenage daughters. They're not teenage kids. Bruce Davison is in his 70s, so I would think that he probably had these kids in his 30s or something, and they're basically just living in the town, and they came to visit or something. We don't really know. They don't really tell you. They don't really imply that they're teenagers. They don't really imply a lot of this stuff. But Imogen's actress, Caitlin, is 30, and Spencer Locke is 27 or 28 during the filming of this, I believe. So they're up there, right? But a lot of the people, a lot of the blahs to this film, they end up giving Tucker and Specs a lot of hate for flirting with these daughters, thinking, oh, they're teen now. They're not. Imogen is 30, right? Specs, who's Lee Winnell, right? Let's see how. Lee Winnell would be 11 years older than Caitlin Gerard, right? Lee Winnell would be 40 to 41 during the events of this film. I don't know if his character is going to be the same age as him. I couldn't tell you that. It takes place back in 2010, right? So they do a lot of makeup stuff to make sure that these characters look the ages that they are, despite it being 2018 in real world. 8 years have passed since the events of Insidious 1, so they have to do a little bit of de-age work with these guys. Because by this time in The Red Door, I believe this takes place in present day, 2018, 2019, 2020. It says it's been 9 years since the events of this, so it's 2019. It's not current day, but it's current-er day, right? Current-er day. And we see Tucker and Specs in a small little cameo scene on YouTube, of all places, and they have a little web series, as we knew they did, and they're explaining astral projection. And we see that they are actually a lot clearly older. Tucker sporting a graying beard that he didn't have in the last key and all that stuff. They're clearly younger than they canonically are here too. So if Tucker's character is in his 40s now, he would be in his 30s back then, alongside Lee Winnell's character, who would also be in his 30s back then. And the Spencer Locke and Caitlin Gerard would be in the ages their actresses would be. That's my theory, at any rate, to try to make sense of all this mess. But I don't buy for a single second that Bruce Davison in his 70s would have teenage kids. I don't. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. I mean, Al Pacino's gonna be a father in his 80s. But I don't think in small town that things like that happen as often as we hear about in Hollywood. I don't think it happens that often. But yeah, that's my defending that little mess that I keep seeing pop up on all sorts of hate for this film and for those characters. I'm a little off topic there, went a little way off topic there. Let's get back on track. We have so that Spencer and Tucker are talking to the daughters. They interrupt Elise's conversation with the daughters to flirt with the daughters because, of course, they're in the 30s and they're a little bit... I don't think Specs has ever been with someone before, so he might be a little bit nerdy about it, but Tucker's definitely coming on strong. It's shot to be comical. It's shot to be comical, and I found it to be comical, because these guys are striking out hard. That's the point. They're striking out hard. They're getting looks that look a little bit weird, and Elise is looking at him going like, what are you two doing? And it's supposed to be funny. And I don't think people found it funny. I found it funny, but humor is the most subjective thing on the planet. One person could be laughing, and then 20 other people can be booing. Or 20 people can be cheering, laughing, and then one person could have a frowny face going, that's not funny. You know, it's the most subjective thing on the planet. I found it comical. Most people probably didn't. After this scene, the two siblings have a fight, Elise and Christian. And Christian storms off, saying that you left me with a monster when you ran away from imaginary ones. So that's a pretty deep line in and of itself. Christian was left with their father, who was an alcoholic monster, and probably abused him a fair bit. Elise was more scared of ghosts and all this other encounters, and she was tired of her father not supporting her, and she was mourning for the mother. She just ran away from that. She ran away from her past, and she refused to confront it. This film is all about confronting and closing those doors in her past. The last key to her past, close it if you might say. Victory. So they go in, they deal with Keyface, Imogen, and I forget the other daughter's name, but Spencer Locke. We're just going to call her Spencer Locke. So Imogen and Spencer Locke go in with Bruce Davison's character to look for a whistle that the mother gave to the child, to the little brother Christian when he was a kid, because Elise found it in the house. And then the ghost kidnaps Spencer Locke, takes her into the spirit realm with his little key abilities that I mentioned earlier. And Imogen ends up teaming up with Tucker, Specs, and Elise to try to save Spencer Locke, whereas Bruce Davison stays at the hospital with Spencer Locke's comatose body. So then Elise gets attacked by the Key Hands monster, and Key Hands takes her into the spirit realm the further. So it's up to Imogen, because we learn through these films that the abilities of astral projection, psychic powers, and all that crap is hereditary. In this film, in the Lambert family film, Dalton gets his ability from his father, and Josh gets his ability from his father. It's very hereditary. So in this, we see that the mother, Elise's mother, had the ability, and that ability passed down to Elise. That ability skipped Christian and passed on to Imogen. So it's very much hereditary. You can skip a generation, but it can also pass down to a generation from that skipped generation if it comes from somebody who had the ability. We clearly think, we have an idea that the mother does have this ability. But that's why she's so easily believing of Elise with the ghost stories and all that stuff. Let's see, what's next? Okay, Imogen goes into the further to try to rescue Elise. Elise basically rescues herself, and she overcomes her trauma with her father. She finds forgiveness in her father, realizing that her father had been possessed by this Key Hands demon that basically gets stronger off the suffering of others. So he half possesses the fathers of these families who live in this house to basically kidnap people and hide them in their basement to bring out the most powerful of suffering out of those trapped people to make Key Hands stronger. And he ended up doing this to Garza, which is how Elise found the trapped person in the basement, and he ended up doing this to Elise's father. And Elise ends up learning that 2 encounters that she had with what she thought were spirits were actually real people. And she ends up feeling a lot of guilt for the person that she encountered as a teenager, realizing that she probably could have saved that woman. And it is ironic that that woman's spirit helps Elise save the other captive that Garza had kidnapped down there. Now, the actions of these possessed people, we would argue, especially thanks to Insidious 2, which I'll get to in a bit, that their actions are not their own, that they are the actions of the person possessing them. But the rest of the world probably won't believe that, which is one of the strongest qualities of this, which I'll get to. So, Garza ends up dying. The father ends up dying. But the father finally redeems himself in the spirit realm by trying to save Elise from Key Hands at the very end. Elise manages to blow the whistle that had made its way into the further, and this calls Elise's mother's spirit to the further to them. And the mother attacks Keyface and knocks him away, saying that you can't hurt my child, blah 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 blah. And Elise and the mother have an embrace, they have a moment together, and then Elise brings the daughters, Imogen and Spencer Locke, back to the real world. And they have a happily ever after, and Elise gets another call by Josh's mother, and that's how we start Insidious. That was the last key. I think this film has a lot of potential, and I do think that this film has a lot of problems. We see here alternate ending, deleted scenes. Deleted scenes were cut from the final product. There's a lot of things in those deleted scenes and that alternate ending that were in the trailers and promotional materials, so a lot of the stuff was last minute cuttings, and there's a lot of things at fault with this film. But I think that there was a lot of potential here. There's a lot of good done here. There's a lot of scares in here. I mentioned the coat scare near the beginning of the film that I think is one of the best scares in this entire franchise. There's a good atmosphere here. It feels like a good, real haunted house feel to this film. I like delving into Elise's character and that character's backstory with her family. I liked the exploration of her ability. I liked the illusion that the mother also has this ability. I like that we also introduce Imogen, who also has this ability. And I really, really wanted Tucker and Specs to team up with Imogen for future shenanigans. But we don't get that here. But that was the last key. I don't think it is as good as Chapter 3 in some areas, but I think it is more watchable than Chapter 3 in other areas, especially if you're fond of Elise's character and you want to know more about Elise's backstory. If you're a fan of the character, if you like Tucker and Specs, you're going to like the last key. Now, I've already talked about this film in great detail, about the comparisons with the Poltergeist, because the basic plot of the Poltergeist in Insidious 1 is the plot of Insidious 1. We have the Lambert family. We introduce the child who is encountering some spooky stuff. He ends up going into a coma, and then the father and the mother have a lot of tension. They split up for a little while. The father goes to stay at the school, grading tests all the way into the late hours of the night, trying to separate himself from this so he could deal with his trauma in his own way. The mother is the one encountering most of the ghostly stuff. That's why the father never encounters most of the stuff, because he's away from the house. He's away from his son. So he's dealing with it by not dealing with it, when the mother's dealing with it by staying with the son, and that's how she encounters all of the ghosts and all of the problems in the house. There's a lot of people that are surrounding Dalton's sleeping body. We have the coat demon man, the ghoul demon man, we have the red-faced Darth Maul demon, we have this kid who's playing hide-and-seek with the wife's character. I forget her name. I think her name is Renee. I want to say her name is Renee, but I don't know. I can't remember her name. I'm going to look it up real quick. Holy crap. It was Renee. I'm surprised at that. I'm normally terrible with names, but her name's Renee. So Renee encounters a lot of stuff, and she tries to convince Josh, played by Patrick Wilson, this guy, of all the spooky stuff going on, and Patrick doesn't believe it until he finally gets roped into believing it. She ends up calling Tucker and Specs to come in to check out the house. Tucker and Specs say that they'll call Elise if they find out that the stuff around the house is actually real or not. So they set up all sorts of technology and stuff, and they stay overnight to check everything out, and then they find out that the ghosty stuff is actually real. So they call Elise to come in, and Elise realizes that there is some ghost stuff going on. But I'm just going to call him Patrick. Patrick says, I don't buy any of this stuff. Get out of here. So Elise and Tucker, and I keep wanting to say Tucker and Dale, Tucker and Specs go away for a while. And Josh has a moment where he realizes that his son is actually astral projecting, and everything that Renee and Elise has been saying is true, because he looks on his son's wall. And this is a plot hole for me, personally. This is a plot hole, because who put that wall back up? They moved houses. Halfway in the middle of the second act, they move houses. Renee keeps seeing creepy, crappy stuff and says to Patrick, hey, let's move houses. I'm tired of living here. And so Patrick says, fine, alright, we'll move. So they get everything out. They go into another house for Elise. They're trapped in Elise. They can't leave now. But so they're in this house, and the spooky stuff keeps happening. And Elise ends up saying it's not the house that's haunted, it's your son that's haunted. So the ghosts are going to follow you no matter where you go, right? So Renee's freaking out about that. But in that old house, all of the drawings that Patrick sees on the wall of his kid's room, somebody took those down from the old house and put them back up in the new house, in the new bedroom. Did Renee do this, or did Patrick do this? This looks like the first time Patrick's been seeing this stuff, so Renee probably did it. But Renee also saw the red-faced demon when Elise first came to the house and looked up at the ceiling and saw him, and had Specs draw the face. When Renee saw that picture, the first thing she should have done was run right into her son's room and pull off one of the pictures from the wall that looks like the red-faced demon, and said, "Hey, my son drew this," and hands it to Elise. And then Elise looks at the wall, sees the red door, and goes like, "Yup, your son's in the further." And Patrick would go like, "Oh, wow, okay." And all of that stuff that happened after the Patrick shoving Elise out, and then realizing that all this stuff, all of that could have been avoided. You could have shaved 5 to 10 minutes off the film. But I don't know, how long is this film? 102 minutes? You could have had it be 90 minutes. You could have shaved those 10 minutes out, me personally, because that feels like a big plot hole. Because all those pictures are on the wall. They tell all that story pretty clearly. That's just me personally, right? So they call Elise back, and they get the kid back. Biddy bada bing, bada bang, bada boom. Plot of The Exorcist. Plot of the Poltergeist. Not The Exorcist. The Poltergeist. Plot of the Poltergeist. So everything's hunky-dory there. That's the Insidious. At the end of Insidious 1, Patrick's in the further. He has rescued his son, but they have become separated. Patrick encounters the lady in black and yells at the lady in black and says, "Hey, get away from me." That scene makes it look like he's conquering his demons, right? Well, when he wakes up in the real world, things aren't exactly what they seem. Because at the end of Insidious 1, there's a cliffhanger where Elise looks at Patrick. They're alone in a room together. And she picks up a camera and takes Patrick's photo. And then Patrick gets homicidal and kills Elise. Chokes her out. And then we have Renee come into the room, picking up the camera, and she freaks out. And then Patrick's saying, "I'm right here behind you." And then the film cuts the credits. It's a very good scene. It's a very, very good lead-in to Insidious Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 feels like it could have been a 30-minute movie. Me personally. That's what a lot of problems I have with Chapter 2, plot-wise. Entertainment value-wise, though, I got a lot of fun from Insidious 2. And I wouldn't shave a single moment off of the picture, even though I think from a plot perspective, the whole Patrick being possessed and trying to rescue him could have been told in 30 to 40 minutes. There's a lot of fluff in the film revolving around revolving around Carl, Tucker, Specs, and Patrick's mom, as they discover Parker Crane, who is the lady in black, and Parker Crane's mother, Lady Crane, and all that spooky stuff happens to them. And then we swip over to Renee and possessed Patrick, who is actually Parker Crane. Renee keeps experiencing spooky, scary skeletons around the house. The piano's playing automatically. The baby's little toy thing goes off automatically. There's a lot of stuff going on. Spooky, scary skeletons. You've heard this story before. So when Tucker, Specs, the mom, and Carl, who is a friend of Elise's, figure out what's going on. They come home, they tell Renee, and then Dalton goes into the further, and Carl is in the further because they tried to confront possessed Patrick, but possessed Patrick overpowers Carl, Tucker, and Specs. He overpowers all three of them, which is pretty funny to me. Because his body, the living body of Patrick Wilson, is deteriorating because a dead spirit is possessing it. And this is something that we learn pretty early. It seems pretty cool plot-wise, that the dead cannot possess the living for very long because they're dead souls, and dead souls will decay a living body if they possess it for too long. Parker wanted to possess a young Patrick Wilson to reclaim the childhood that was stolen from him, but he would have killed Patrick's body within a couple of months. It would be dead again, and he would not be unable to reclaim that childhood if he kept trying to do that, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. That was very, very interesting. And then possessed Patrick goes full Jack Nicholson of The Shining on Renee and the two kids. So that happens, and Foster probably will have PTSD for the rest of his life because of seeing his father try to murder his mom and the two kids. So poor Foster. Foster's the brother of Dalton. So yeah, he's the normal kid, the kid that doesn't have any supernatural powers. So like in comparison to the last key, if Dalton is child Elise, Foster is Christian. So that's pretty cool how the Lambert family and Elise's family kind of mirror each other. So Patrick, who is not Patrick, he's possessed by Parker Crane, attacks the family. Carl, who dies, ends up encountering the real Patrick in the further, and the two of them team up to try to stop possessed Patrick, who is Parker Crane, and they end up encountering Elise in the further, and then they end up succeeding in trying to get Parker Crane out of Patrick's body. Then Dalton goes into the further to try to rescue his father, to get him back into his body in time, and they succeed in doing that, and everything's hunky-dory again. And then they ask Carl, who is not dead after all, he was just knocked out, to hypnotize Patrick and Dalton into forgetting everything about the further. I would argue you should have done that to Foster and Renee, too. I would argue you should have done it to the whole family. The whole family. Because by having half of them remember, Renee has to be the one to shoulder the entire burden for the family. The entire burden. Which leads into the Red Door. 9 years have passed since the events of Insidious Chapter 2. Patrick and Dalton have forgotten the events of Insidious Chapters 1 and 2. Renee remembers it, and Foster keeps having night terrors about that event, and Renee has to convince Foster, probably through years of therapy, to forget this event and think that it was just a dream. But this still causes a rift between Patrick and his kids, who think that they keep dreaming of him being a bad guy. Dalton doesn't remember that Patrick was possessed, so these night terrors that Dalton keeps having of a possessed Patrick chasing them around the house, he thinks that it's actually Patrick, his actual father. So that causes a rift between them. And then Renee, who just gets so tired of dealing with all of that, of dealing with this rift in the family and trying to keep everything together, being the sole person in the family trying to do this, because Patrick can't help her because he can't remember. So he's also part of the problem because he can't remember. He's also causing this rift because he's having memory problems himself from having his memory wiped twice. So now he's having memory fog and brain fog and all that stuff. So that's causing him some issues. And so she just divorces him during this time skip. They have a divorce. I disagree with the divorce personally, but after watching this film from start to finish, because in the first act I ended up pausing it to have a long rant, saying that the divorce and then the father and son being distant with one another was one of the most cliched and overused tropes in the history of fiction, and it just made me a little bit angry to see it happen yet again. After whenever you do a time skip, the parents always divorce, and that pissed me off that it happened to the Lambert family, because I really wanted them to have a happy ending, and they seem to have gotten one in Insidious 2. No, they get pulled back to have some more stuff happen. But I agree that there is a reason for Red Door to exist. There's a reason to talk about some of that unfinished tension, that unfinished drama surrounding the Lambert family and what that could have looked like over the course of 9 years. So that's pretty interesting to see that dynamic happen here, because in Insidious 4, The Red Door, Dalton is going off to college. Patrick has been divorced from the wife. The wife is living in a new house with Foster and the 9-year-old daughter. The 9-year-old daughter is pretty cool with Patrick and all that stuff. He gets the kids on the weekends. We open the film with the death of Patrick's mother. I'm okay with this, honestly. Maybe they couldn't get her to come back. This is Patrick Wilson's directorial debut, by the way. And honestly, I'm going to step out of the plot for a moment and say, from a film director's perspective, I can really appreciate the technique and ability that Patrick's putting off here for his directorial debut. He's clearly picked up a lot of nods and notes from both Leigh Whannell, from James Wan, from all sorts of stuff, from being in the horror genre for so long. He's been with James for the Conjuring movies. He's been with James for the first 2 Insidious movies. He's been along for the ride for quite a bit for the horror genre. So he has put everything that he has learned from this genre into this film, and you could tell that the guy had a lot of heart. He wanted to make a story that felt justified, that felt like a justifiable reason to continue the story from chapter 2. And from that perspective, I can say that there is some reason why the Insidious Red Door exists. There's a reason why it's not Insidious 4 and Insidious 5, because it doesn't feel like it needs to be a 4 or 5. It feels like a closure story to the first 2 Insidious films, if that makes sense. This is over an hour, so here we are, though. We're at the final film. We open with the death of Patrick's mom. He has been divorced from the wife, and his son, Dalton, hates him. Foster, we don't really know too much about Foster. But the best part here, though, Dalton, and I think even Foster's characters, are the same kids from the first 2 Insidious movies. They have come back to reprise their roles. That's pretty cool to me, honestly. They did this for from M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable trilogy. In Glass, they bring back the son of Bruce Willis's character in Unbreakable. It's been 20 years, right? It's been a long time. And they bring him back. That's pretty cool to do, right? I like that they did that with the Dalton actor. And I don't know about the Foster actor. I didn't look into that, but I assume the Foster actor too. But definitely the Dalton character, because this film is focusing on him. And I can honestly say, I have not seen the Dalton actor in too many films since the ones that he was a kid in. But he comes back into the character and gives a very brilliant take on this film that I can really appreciate. Patrick Wilson, also professional actor. I like his performance. I like most everybody's performances in here, except for perhaps Renee's performance. And then I can get to that when I get to the plot part. So Patrick tries to bond with his son by saying, hey, I'm going to drive you to your new college. I'm going to drive you there because, I don't think he's got a license to drive or his own car yet. So he accepts. and Patrick drives it for a father-son little road trip. And thankfully, the whole film wasn't a father-son road trip, because if it was, I would have been a little bit... I would have been angry. But thankfully, it wasn't a father-son road trip. So they get to the college in the first act, and then they have a fight, and Patrick leaves in a huff. He leaves crying, in a crying huff. And Dalton is just there, sitting in his college dorm room, in a huff. His dorm roommate, I ended up mentioning her at the beginning of this series breakdown review. She is probably one of the best characters in this film. I know it feels like she doesn't belong in a serious drama horror, but that's the point. Tucker and Specs were comedic relief. She is a comedic relief because Tucker and Specs aren't in this film as much. She ends up also being the one to help move the plot along, because Dalton doesn't really have too much agency in regards to that stuff. He ends up encountering things are happening to him, and he is reacting to the things that he learns. He's a very reactive character, whereas his roommate is a proactive character. A proactive character can pull the reactive character along to help push the plot around. And that is exactly what she does. She proactively goes to the frat party, dragging Dalton along. Dalton doesn't want to be there, but she helps him loosen up a little bit. And he ends up encountering a ghosty ghost. And they go. His art class teacher is basically using the same pseudo-hypnotic techniques that Carl used at the end of Insidious 2 to help him forget the events. So the events of Insidious 1 and 2 are starting to return to his memory, so he starts to remember the red door. And what comes out of the red door after he paints the red door but the red-faced demon? This is where I feel like the film falls apart. Because while I can respect what Patrick and Lee Winnell, who also wrote the screenplay story, tried to do here with the family drama with Patrick and his sons, drama and the aftermath of that shining moment here. I can respect that, but I also don't think you should have brought the red-faced demon back. At the end of Insidious 2, Elise, now a ghost, who is helping out Tucker and Specs, are investigating another house. And Elise goes into that house to talk to the lady in the wheelchair, who seems to have cognitive abilities and what else. She's encountering supernatural stuff too. Elise's spirit is talking to her, but then she looks behind the girl in the wheelchair to something up in the ceiling, in the corner, in the dark. And we don't see what she's looking at. We see Elise's face, and she goes, "Oh my God." And then the film cuts to credits. We never know what she looks at. We never know what she's looking at. We never know if this is a bigger, deeper, darker demon than the red-faced Darth Maul demon. We don't know. And I hoped that the red door was going to finally answer that. You know, Elise is on the cover here. I thought that the red door was going to answer that cliffhanger. That she was going to see some really creepy stuff, and that creepy stuff is going to come back to haunt them 9 years later. But no, it's just the red demon again. So all of the supernatural crap with the red demon I thought was blah. I didn't care for it. That's why I think this is the worst one in the franchise. I don't think it's a bad film by any means. I just think it's the worst one in the franchise. Because it's reusing the red-faced demon But I can appreciate one thing about the red-faced demon. It is Dalton this time who is dealing with that trauma, who is dealing with that part of his life. He is facing his demons, and he is forgiving his father for things that he blamed him for because he couldn't remember that he was possessed by Parker Crane at the time. Because you see, in the events of Insidious 2, clearly the cops are going to investigate the death of Elise, and they're probably going to suspect Patrick for doing the murdering, because we all clearly saw at the end of Insidious 1 that he did do it. But The cops say that the autopsy report and the fingerprintings and all that CSI stuff happens, and the cop leading the investigation ends up calling Renee and saying that the fingerprints on the body do not match Patrick's that they have on file, because clearly it was the hands of the woman in black who was strangling Elise and not Patrick, because his soul wasn't in his body. So that right away clears Patrick's character in the aftermath from being charged with murder. But you'd think that they would suspect somebody else in the house for doing it. If they never found out who did it, they'd probably be... That's one of those plot points that doesn't end up going anywhere. There's another one from 2 that doesn't happen in this one. But I do like Dalton dealing and accepting his past and the traumas from his past. Most of his trauma actually came from forgetting his past. Because had he remembered it, he probably would have been a much better person, a much stronger person as a result of it. Because at the end of this film, he refuses to have his memory be wiped again. He refuses to accept that because he says that he needs to remember. Remembering can help him move forward in ways that forgetting never could. Because if you just forget the events of the past, you are running away from it. You are not resolving these issues. You are not getting stronger from these issues. You are just escaping. You're just fleeing and running away. And he refuses to do that anymore. He faced his trauma. He faced his demons. That's awesome. And with Patrick's character, throughout the events of the Red Door, he is dealing with his own father. Both of these characters are dealing with fathers, which is pretty good. It's a family story. I like that idea. I do like that aspect, even if I feel like the divorce and the father-son haze is a little bit overused. Patrick ends up learning that his father, he never knew his father, but he learned that his mother kept photographs of his father, because he's living in his mother's house during the divorce. He pulls out the photographs, and at the end he ends up seeing the specter of his father. He learns that his father committed suicide by jumping off a building, saying that it ends with me. And then we learn throughout the film that Patrick's father was also capable of astral projection. He has the ability, and we learn through this that through the last key that it was definitely hereditary. Elise had it, her mother had it, and now her niece has it. So it might have skipped Christian, but it's hereditary. If you have a parent or a grandparent with it, you might have it. And that's what happens here. So if Patrick has it, and his son has it, so maybe his father could have had it too. That's a pretty interesting writing point to add in. So they do that. And he ends up coming to terms with a father that he never knew. Because he said he would never be like his father. And he ended up, ironically, being just like his father. Just not in the ways that he thought his father was like. And at the end of the film, everybody gets back together, and Patrick and Renee reconcile. But before that happens, Patrick goes to Renee's house to get answers for the things that he doesn't remember, for the things that he got hypnotized into forgetting. But he's starting to remember little bits and pieces about it, and he wants more information. So he goes to Renee to confront her about this, because he thinks that she might know something. And she does. She ends up showing the pictures of the woman in black haunting him, and how Elise made him forget about that. And then how she explains the events of Insidious 1 and 2 to him, basically. And so Patrick goes like, and he ends up going, so why did you do all this distancing from me, blah, 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 divorcing? And then Renee says something that feels so out of character for her that I just got pulled out of the movie for a moment. She shouts at him, saying, you tried to kill us. You tried to attack us. And then she stops in mid-sentence, going like, oh, I know it was just Parker Crane doing it, but blah, 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 and she's trying to justify herself from that previous outburst. I thought that was so out of character for her, that, because prior to anybody else in the film, prior to even this guy who actually has the ability to astral project, Renee, the one who doesn't have the ability, is the first one to believe in the spiritual realm. She is the first one to believe that there's something else out there, and it's after her son. She's the first one to believe, the first one to call Elise, the first one to believe Elise, the first one to believe all of this stuff. So why now is she the one denying all of it? She's the one saying, I don't like all of this stuff. And of course, obviously, she doesn't want to be attacked by spirits and like crap, right? But she clearly understands that it wasn't Patrick, but he was possessed. Clearly, she would have understood that, right? Clearly, she would have worked with. But like I said at the beginning of this portion of this series breakdown, she was alone. Patrick wasn't there to help her. He was there, but he wasn't there because Carl made him and Dalton forget at the end of Insidious 2, the events of Insidious 1 and 2. So Patrick wasn't there to support her with all of this supernatural stuff. So once again, she was alone. And we saw what happened when she was alone in the first Insidious, when Patrick was distancing himself from her, when he was distancing himself from his family and all that other stuff. So maybe he went back to doing that after forgetting the events of Insidious 1 and 2. He was suffering from brain fog. He was dealing with his own stuff in his own way by distancing himself. Renee left to deal with children with night terrors and all this stuff. It just became way too much for her. So I can sympathize, but I do think that it was out of character for her to pull the divorce card. I personally think that after a few years, if this became too much for her, she would have just pulled Patrick back into the supernatural realm by explaining everything to him and saying that I need your help to keep this family together, because you are not you, because you've forgotten parts of yourself that I realize now you should never have forgotten. And then I think that she would have done that instead of just divorcing him and running away. But I think that might just be part of the theme of this film. Dalton is running away to college. Patrick is running away from something else. Renee is running away from trying to deal with all of this stuff. And we don't know what Foster's doing. We never know what Foster's doing. What is Foster doing? We don't know. He's just the other brother, which and the daughter, the 9-year-old daughter, we never see her since the funeral. This is their story. These two here. She's just there to play a glorified cameo exposition machine. But yeah, there's that scene, and it happened. And at the end of the movie, when Patrick and Dalton end up reconciling, Renee says, oh, you could stay for dinner a little bit longer, and blah, blah, blah. And as you infer from that moment that they're probably going to get back together after that. Now that they both have chosen to remember the events of the further and their abilities, and they learn to just protect themselves from the further, much like Elise has learned to protect herself after the events of Chapter 3. My problems with this film are many. I'm not going to list all of them. But my biggest problem was that what they did with Tucker and Specs. The plot point in Insidious 2 being completely discarded. Tucker and Specs continued to do what Elise had started, what they started with Elise from Chapter 3. They continued going to make house calls. They continued to do all of that stuff. I feel like the college roommate would have called Tucker and Specs over to the college campus to investigate the spooky stuff going on and reintroduce these characters back in. And Elise's spirit could have been tagging along. Instead of the red-faced demon, we could have gotten what she had seen at the end of Insidious 2 to bring that plot point along. I thought that there was a lot of stuff from 2 that we would have been focusing on. We do focus a lot of what happens on 2, but more on the family drama side. The horror almost takes a sort of back seat in the Red Door to Chapter 2. And we focus more on the characters rather than the supernatural entities haunting. The hauntings is just a backdrop. It's just part of the settings. It's part of the world. And it's more about these guys accepting that. And accepting their abilities. And reconciling with one another and the family. Getting back together instead of being torn apart. At the same time, there is another plot point that I want to say is my biggest gripe. The audience versus the characters and the dissonance of knowledge. We as an audience, we have seen Insidious 1 and 2. We can rewatch them at any time, and many viewers of the Red Door probably have rewatched 1 and 2 before seeing the Red Door, so it is very fresh on their minds. So when the bulk of this film is just Patrick and Dalton trying to remember events that we already know, it makes the film feel like a waste of time. It makes the whole film feel like it's pointless. It's just a waste of time. Everybody's trying to recapture and remember events that we already know. There are plenty of films that tackle amnesiacs and whatnot, and my favorite one is Memento. It's not necessarily amnesia, I know that. He has a memory problem, where he will immediately forget. He cannot make new long-term memories. He will immediately forget anything that he encounters. But I like that the film plays itself in reverse, so as to say. The black and whites are in reverse to the color. So we watch the film one way, and then we have to watch it backwards. There are different cuts to the film in chronological order, with the black and whites and the color films being edited back in from start to finish. And Memento is an amazing movie. Don't want to get too far off topic here, but Memento is an amazing movie that does amnesiac, a type of story where the character doesn't know something, but the audience also doesn't know something at the same time. And it brings it all together in a way that's really, really good. In this, we know everything. We know the red-faced demon. We know what happens to these guys. We know these guys got amnesiac, about hypnotized to forget everything. We know this. So when we spend the bulk of the film trying to recapture those memories, trying to remember those memories, it feels pointless. But there are elements in this film that feel like they do have a point. Patrick's dealing with a new plot thread regarding his father that we've not seen dealt with before. So that was pretty good. Dalton has a roommate, and for her alone, his section of the story is pretty good. I would say that this is a very good first try directorial attempt by Patrick, but from a plot perspective, it feels like it's too much of a side story that doesn't really need to be there. It's a Freddy final chapter. It's a Freddy 6, Nightmare on Elm Street 6 story. It's a film that you can watch, you can enjoy it, but you don't really need to see it. It doesn't really need to be there. It doesn't really need to happen, but it's there. You can watch it. It's fine. And I would say that it is a nice conclusion to the Lambert family story. It's just not in a way that I would have wanted to see it done. But I didn't write it. I didn't create this story. So the way that they did it is the way they're allowed to do it. I don't have to agree with all of the points. But can I say that I enjoyed this story? Yeah. I would give this a B-, or even a C+. It's teetering on which one it is. It is watchable from start to finish. You don't really need to have seen chapters 3 and 4 to watch this one. Even though it's Insidious 5, they don't cover any plot points from 3 and 4 to a degree that makes them needing to be watched. You only need to see 1 and 2 to watch The Red Door. But that's part of why I'm disappointed in this film, is Elise and Tucker and Specs, and the lack of Imogen that was introduced in The Last Key. I thought that side of the story would be incorporated here just a little bit more. But maybe in the other spin-off, I hear that there's another spin-off happening. Maybe we'll see them in that one. I don't know. I haven't seen any trailers for it. I'm completely blind to it. So if that's not the case, then that's not the case. But I'd like to see more regarding Tucker, Specs, the ghost of Elise, which I don't think we've seen the last of her, so long as Elise's actress Lynn Shay is alive. I think they'll keep trying to ask her to come back for more stuff. I don't think she's going to be doing any physically demanding stuff. You know, she's in her late 70s now. I don't think she's going to be doing a lot of that, but she seems to be happy. She seems to be happy to come back to play this character, and she just steps right back into Elise's shoes every time. So I'd like to see more from her, and I want to see Imogen's character come back. Caitlin Gerard is 35 years old, so I agree that a story set in 2018, time skipping into 2010, time skipping to 2019, 9 years later, as it says here, Caitlin Gerard playing a 39-year-old. I don't. It's whatever. I think you could still bring that actress back and make her older or younger to fit for a role set in the Red Door time period era. I think you could still do that. And I think you could bring Tucker and Specs. I keep trying to say Tucker and Dale. I keep trying to say that. Good movie. Watch that. Tucker and Specs, you could bring them in. Bring Elise's ghost back. And deal with what happened in the cliffhanger of this. We need to see what that was. What was she looking at? Let's find out. Let's find out.